'Twas the night before Christmas, and all through the house not a creature was stirring, not even a mouse. The stockings were hung by the fireside with care, in hopes that St. Nicholas soon would be there. The children were nestled snug in their bed, while visions of sugar plums danced in their head. And Mamma in a kerchief and I in my cap had just settled down for a long winter's nap, when out on the lawn there arose such a clatter, I sprang from my bed to see what was the matter. Away to the window I flew in a flash, tore open the shutters and threw up the sash. The moon on the breast of the new fallen snow cast the lustre of midday on the objects below, when what to my wondering eyes did appear but a miniature sledge and a tiny reindeer. The little old driver, so nimble, so quick, I knew in an instant it must be St. Nick. His chargers like eagles, so swiftly they came, he whistled and shouted and called them by name. Now Dasher, Dancer, Prancer, Vixen, Comet, Cupid, Donner and Blitzen, to the top of the porch, to the top of the hall, dash away, dash away, dash away all. As dry leaves that before the wild hurricane fly, when they meet with an obstacle mount to the sky, so up to the top of the rooftops they flew, with a sledge full of toys and St. Nicholas too. And then, in a twinkling, up on the roof, I heard the prancing and dancing of each tiny hoof. As I withdrew my head and was turning around, down the chimney St. Nicholas came with a bound. He was dressed all in fur from his head to his foot. His clothes were all tarnished in ashes and soot. A bundle of toys he had on his back. He looked just like a peddler carrying his pack. His eyes, how they sparkled. His dimples, how merry. His cheeks were like roses, his nose like a cherry. His droll little mouth was drawn up like a bow, and the beard on his chin was as white as the snow. He was chubby and plump, a jolly old elf. I laughed when I saw him, in spite of myself, but a wink of his eye and a nod of his head soon gave me to know I had nothing to dread. Without saying a word, he went to his work, and he filled all the stockings, then turned with a jerk, and laying a finger aside of his nose, with a nod of his head, up the chimney he rose. He sprang to his sleigh, to his team gave a whistle, and they mounted the air like the down of a thistle, and I heard him exclaim, ere he went out of sight, "Happy Christmas to all, and to all a good night." In old Russia there was a village, and in that village there was a woman. Everyone knew her as Baboushka. They would call her name Baboushka, Baboushka, Baboushka. She had the cleanest, the best house in all of the village. She kept it clean and tidy, and everything had a place, and everything was in its place. Clean, neat and tidy, and she was very proud of the fact that she had the best house in all of the village in old Russia. One night, as she looked out of the window, she could see that the snow was falling. All Baboushka could think of was just how dirty her floors would get if she were to go outside and to tramp through the mud and the snow and the sleet. But suddenly, there was a great shout throughout the whole of the village, and everyone was pointing up towards the sky, for they could see that there was a great shining star. Everyone shouted, "Baboushka, Baboushka, Baboushka! Come and look at this great star in the sky." Baboushka rose from a chair by the side of the fire, and she did go over to the window, but when she looked out through the glass, all she could really see was how dirty the glass was, and she didn't care about some great star in the sky. Everyone shouted, "Baboushka, Baboushka, Baboushka! You should come and look at the star in the sky!" But Baboushka was quite happy, taking a cloth and cleaning at the window and sitting down by the side of a fire. It was warm inside of a house. It was clean and it was dry, and she fell asleep. Fell asleep by the side of the fire, and she dreamt of times past, winters before this winter, when all of her children would be so excited that Christmas was coming. And as she dreamt and as she slept, there were 1, 2, 3 great knocks upon the door. Baboushka was startled. She catapulted out of a dream and a sleep, and she went to the door, and she could not believe her eyes, because when she looked there at her door, there were 1, 2, 3 kings, beautifully dressed in the finest of clothes, crowns upon their heads, and they had ridden to that place on camels, for the camels were tethered down by the side of Baboushka's house. "We are kings," they spoke. 3 kings who have followed a star to come to this place. We are Balthasar, Caspar, and Melchior. We have heard from the people inside of your village that yours is the best house of all, and we would wish to stay here, and perhaps, Baboushka, 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 you would travel with us, for we follow the star because we know that there will be a child born, a prince, a king among men, who will be born inside of a cowshed, and we would wish for you to come with us. Baboushka was very proud to hear that the other people inside of the village thought that her house was the cleanest and the tidiest, and the fact that 3 kings would wish to stay with her. She scurried them in, even though their feet were covered with snow and with mud. She welcomed them in. She sat them down by the fire. She fed them, and they all lay down in beds inside of a house. And the next morning, as she gave them breakfast, each of them, Balthasar, Caspar, and Melchior, asked, pleaded, begged Baboushka to come with them. But she said, "I'm an old woman. I need to clean the house. I have no gifts that I could give to a baby king," even though she was quite interested in the idea of seeing a baby king that would be born inside of a cowshed. And she watched the 3 kings. She directed them down the road, the way that they must travel. And it was only after she had cleaned the house, after she had remade the bed, that she looked and thought, I would really like to go and see a baby king. But what can I give to him? And she remembered all of the toys that she'd had for all of her children. They were still there inside of the top of the house, and she brought them all down and washed them and painted them and repaired them, and she thought that these would be very good to give to a baby king. She put them in a pack, in a sack at her back, and she thought that she would be able to go and follow after the 3 kings, but the snow had fallen so hard that she could not see their footprints. But she kept travelling, and she'd wrapped herself warm with a scarf around her neck and a hat upon her head and gloves on her hands, and the bundle of toys washed and clean and repainted in the bundle in the pack at her back. And as she went, the night wrapped its cold fingers about her, and she pulled the scarf closer to her neck, and she came to a village. And as she came to the outskirts of the village, she looked in through a window, and there she could see that there was a girl, a good girl, sitting down by the side of the fire, but with a tear at the corner of her eye. because she had no toys. Baboushka thought, perhaps if I give this girl one of these toys from this bundle at my back, I could leave it at the windowsill. And that's just what she did. She placed a toy on the window ledge of this girl's house, and on she went. And as she walked past a field, there was a shepherd boy, and the shepherd boy was tending his flocks and rubbing his hands together, for his fingers were cold, and Baboushka did not wait for a single heartbeat. By the gate at the fence that the field in which the boy was looking after the sheep, she took her own gloves off and put them there for the boy to find as a gift from Baboushka. And on she walked, and on she went, and everywhere she went she met children who had no scarves at their necks, who had no hats upon their heads, who had no toys. And she travelled from the top of the world to the bottom of the world, to the side of the world, and all around. And she brought with her that great bundle of toys that had once belonged to her own children. And at every house, if she looked in and saw that there were children who had been good, she would leave a toy. In fact, to this day, children in Russia still believe that Baboushka will bring them presents. So as they fall asleep at those Christmas times, as the darkness of the night wraps its fingers about them, they will fall asleep and whisper, Baboushka, Baboushka, Baboushka. At this Christmas time, the two old ducks only wanted to have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 little ducklings. The snow was falling, it was cold, the lake was iced, and they still wanted to have some ducklings as a Christmas present. And they looked in the nest, and what did they see but 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 eggs. They knew that this was a gift, a Christmas gift indeed. The first egg was as big as your hand. The second egg was as big as your other hand. The third egg was as small as your thumb. The fourth egg was as long as your arm. But the fifth egg was a different size and a different shape and a different colour. But they sat down upon the eggs to keep them warm against the frost. And the first egg opened up, and out came a little duckling. It looked at its mother and father and said, "Quack!" And they danced all around. And now they sat down on the 4 eggs. And the second egg opened up, and out came a little duckling, and it said, "Quack!" Now they sat down on the egg that was as small as your thumb. And they sat down very carefully. And that egg opened up, and out came the smallest little duckling that you ever did see. But it had a very big voice, and it said, "Quack!" For the first duck said, "Quack." And the second duck said, "Quack." But the third duck said, "Quack!" as loud as you like. Now they sat down on the egg that was as long as your arm. And they sat down, and the egg opened up, and out came the biggest little duckling that you ever did see. But it had a very small voice, and it said, "Quack." So the first duck said, "Quack." And the second duck said, "Quack." But the third duck said, "Quack!" as loud as you like. Duck number 4 said, "Quack." And now there was only 1 egg left. It was a different size, and a different shape, and a different colour. But they sat down upon the egg, and they waited, 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 and they waited. And that egg opened up, and out came the funniest looking little duckling that you ever did see. And it did not say quack. It said quick, 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 quick. So the first duck said quack, and the second duck said quack. The third duck said quack. Duck number 4 said quack. But the fifth duck said quick, 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 quick. They went on. They went to a field, and in the field there was a farmer who was digging and digging, and he was hot, 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 digging all of his Christmas potatoes out of the ground. And the first duck said quack, and the second duck said quack, and the third duck said quack. Duck number 4 said quack, but the fifth duck said quick, 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 quick. And the farmer thought that was the farmer's wife telling him to dig so quick. And he'd finished his work as quick as that because he'd heard the duck say quick. But the two old ducks, what we're going to do? What we're going to say when people find out that we've got a duck that says quick and not quack? And who should be there, a-pedalling upon his bike with a pack and a sack at his back, filled with letters for you and for me? It was the postman. And he stopped and he listened, and the first duck said quack, and the second duck said quack, but the third duck said quack. Duck number 4 said quack, and the fifth duck said quick, 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 quick. And the postman thought it was the postmaster telling him to post the letters as quick as he could, and that's just what he did. From the pack and the sack at his back, finished his work as quick as that. And he was finished and in time for his tea and a kiss and a cuddle from his children 3. What are we going to do? What we're going to say, said the two old ducks, when people find out that we've got a duck that says quick and not quack. But that night, as the snow fell down, they came to a road. And to help them across, the policeman raised his hands and stopped the traffic. And to say thank you, the first duck said quack. And the second duck said quack. The third duck said quack. Duck number 4 said quack. And the fifth duck said quick, 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 quick. The policeman listened. Quick, quick, where? He said to himself. And he could hear a dog barking as quick as you like. And he knew it was old Tom's dog, who would only bark if old Tom was in trouble. So off the policeman went and lifted old Tom, who had slipped on the ice, fallen on his back as quick as that. And old Tom's dog looked around and went, where is that? Clever, little duckling, that has helped. And the first duck said quack. And the second duck said quack. The third duck said quack. Duck number 4 said quack. But the fifth duck said quick, 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 quick. Please help us, said the two old ducks. Old Tom's dog smiled and said, I will teach this little duckling to dance. And sure enough, the dog and the duck, they danced around, and he taught the little duck to say bark. It said quick over here and bark over there. Quick and bark and quick and bark and bark and quick and bark and quick and bark. And then the duck said quack. Oh. The old dog lay down and the little duckling lay beside him. And it went quack, 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 quack. And it fell quick, quick, quickly asleep. And old Tom's dog, he didn't roar and didn't snore. When he fell asleep, he went meow. Everyone thought that the dog belonged to them. If you were to ask them, they would say that the dog was theirs, but the dog knew fine well who it belonged to, and that was to itself. Oh yes, the dog would go into the town, and it would scratch at the doors, and the doors would be open, and it would be given food. But this dog was its own master. It didn't live inside of anyone's house. In fact, it had a good burrow that it would sleep in underneath the bridge by the side of the river. Every morning it would go out and scritch, scritch upon the door and be fed. It even had a choice. If there was food given to it that it did not like, then it could always go next door to another house. And many of the doors would have scratch marks just at the corner. But this morning, The dog woke up, and its own breath was in steaming clouds by its nostrils, and it had never seen this before, and the dog felt cold. When it looked out from underneath the bridge, you could see goose feathers falling from out of the sky. It had never seen that either. But there was a lot of noise, of people walking on the bridge towards the village. They were all talking, one with another, about a baby that had been born. The dog was curious. It could smell good food coming from out of the houses inside of the village, and it decided that it would rouse itself from its sleep and follow all of the people as they went into the town. It had never seen so many people. It was really looking forward to the food that it was going to get, for the smells were delicious in the air. And still, people kept talking about a baby that had been born. When it came to the first house, it could hear that there were many people inside, laughing and dancing, shouting and singing, and it scritched upon the door, and the door stayed closed. It scratched again. It scritched again, and still the door stayed closed. I shall go to the next house then. And the dog went to the next door. And again, there were many people inside and delicious smells coming from underneath the door. The dog's mouth was watering. It scritched at the door and waited. And it would still be waiting now. It pulled itself up against the wall, put its paws on the window ledge, and looked inside, and sure enough, the house was filled with people. But the funniest thing of all was, the dog could see that people had put a tree inside of the house. A tree inside of the house. Well, what good is that? It had lights and candles, and it could see that there was a beautiful fairy at the top of the Christmas tree, for that's what it was. But the dog had never seen anything so funny in all of its life. What? A tree inside of a house? But it could smell the food and could see it on the table. The table inside of that house was almost groaning underneath all of the food. I shall go to the next house. And again, it scritched upon the door, and the door stayed closed. In fact, it went to every door in the village, and all of the doors were closed to the dog. It was only the small house at the end of the village that belonged to the old woman. She would give the dog something to eat. Surely she would. And sure enough, as he got closer, he couldn't smell all of the good food. He didn't hear the voices, and he scritched, and before he'd even finished, the door was opened up, and there stood the old woman. Friend dog, it's good to see you. At this Christmas time, when a baby is born, and it's good to see you. Come inside, I'll give you some food. And the dog noticed that there was no groaning table covered with food. There was no huge fire burning in a grate. In fact, there were just a few small, poor pieces of coal sputtering and giving off little warmth. But this woman didn't hesitate. She took a knife and cut everything she had on a plate and scraped half of it into a bowl for the dog, and the dog, without thinking, gobbled the lot up. That's good. Good to see you enjoying your food. It's good to celebrate the birth of that baby, said the old woman. She hadn't had much, and yet she had shared half of it with the dog without even thinking about it. As the woman fell asleep by the poor light and warmth of a fire, the dog felt very guilty indeed that she had so little, and yet he had eaten it so quickly without even thinking. He skulked out, and now the goose feathers lay upon the ground cold on his paws. And as he went through the town, who should he meet but the proud Peacock? Why, friend dog, what are you doing out today? The dog spoke of how he'd been to every house, scratched upon the doors and had not been given any food, and yet it was the old woman who had given him half of what she had. The peacock smiled. There was a baby born many hundreds of thousands of years ago, and everyone celebrates the fact. Their friends, their relatives, they all come, and the poor old woman who has no one, she must dine by herself. And it was as the peacock spoke, it realized that the dog and the peacock could help him. And so he spoke. My master, he has much food. He has lots of wood and coal to burn. I shall go and get some. And I shall bring some sausages. The peacock went inside of the house and placed some wood under one wing and placed some coal under the other and brought those sausages. Now, rather than let them drag upon the ground, the dog tied them about his neck as if it were a tie. If anyone had looked out of the window and seen the dog with sausages for a bow tie and the peacock with wood and coal underneath its arm, well, they would have laughed, but they were too busy enjoying themselves with friends and relatives, celebrating this Christmas tide. As they went along, who should be there but the cat? The cat did smile. Dog and peacock, why do you dress so strangely? And you, peacock, why do you have wood under your wings and coal? And two of them spoke of how the old woman, who had so little, had shared half of it with the dog. The cat smiled. My mistress has many fish. I shall bring 2 fish, and we shall share them with the old woman. And sure enough, the cat went into the house and brought out 2 fish that had hung about its neck. Now, if anyone had taken the time to look out of the window and see the dog and the peacock and the cat walking with sausages for a tie and fish over the neck and wood and coal, they would have laughed. But no one looked out. They were too busy enjoying and celebrating with their family and relatives. Up in the tree, there was the owl. "Ooh, you, what are you doing?" said the owl. And when they told of the old woman, the owl wished that he could come too. And he rode upon the dog's back. A dog with sausages about its neck, an owl on its back, a cat with fish around its neck, a peacock there with wood and coal beneath its wings. And along the street they went until they came to the old woman's house. She was still asleep. The fire was nearly out. There was no singing or dancing inside of her house, and it was cold, but the coal that the peacock had was dropped into the fire. The sticks were placed on top. The cat and the dog took pans and started to cook the sausages and the fish. Soon it was warm inside of the old woman's house. There were delicious smells of sausages and fish in the air, and the old woman stirred. And as she stirred, the peacock spread out his wings, and the owl flew and lay upon the peacock's head, and its bright eyes shone out. And the cat was there at the bottom of the tree going this way and that. And by the flickering fire's light, the owl's eyes looked like angel's eyes. The cat's eyes looked like candles upon the tree. And the peacock, with its blue and green feathers spread out, looked just like a Christmas tree. Oh, friend dog, you have brought your friends here for me to share the celebration in it. The old woman took out plates and she divided the sausages. She divided the fish. And in that place, the old woman, the dog, the cat, the peacock and the owl celebrated Christmas as it had never been celebrated for many years. People got to find out about what had happened with the old woman. And when it did come to Christmas time, and snowflakes would fall onto the ground like goose feathers, they would invite the old woman to sit with them, to sit by their tables covered with food, to sit by their fires so warm, to sit and tell the tale of the dog and the peacock. He was old and he was cold, but in his time he had been the finest shoemaker that had lived in this town. People would argue and push and shove to get to his shop. But now, inside the old town, everything had moved away from the market square, and his shop was just that little bit too far for people to travel to. He still made shoes, but with less and less customers. He didn't have that much money, and now, on this night very close to Christmas, all he had was enough money to buy one piece of leather. He bought the leather, he cut it out, he placed it upon the table, but he was old and cold. And he said to his wife, "I am too tired now. I will make the shoes tomorrow." And he laid out all of the parts of the pieces of the shoe on top of the table and left them that night. But the next morning when he woke up and went downstairs, there, on top of the table, where it had all been cut out, it had been hammered and stitched, and two beautiful shoes had been made. The stitching was so tiny, he couldn't believe it. He shouted to his wife, "My wife, did you make those shoes?" She just looked at him. "Do I look like I'm the kind of person who can make shoes? I do not know where the shoes have come from, but let's take it as a miracle." And they placed the shoes in the window. Now it so happened that a very rich man was walking past, and he looked at the shoes, and as soon as he saw how finely they had been made, how well they'd been hammered, he decided that he would knock upon the door, and as the door creaked open, the old shoemaker said yes. The rich man looked and said, "I would wish to buy those fine shoes there. How much do you want for them?" The old shoemaker looked. He hadn't done any work. He looked and said, "I would wish to have 2 florins. The rich man looked at him. "2 florins? 2 florins? I will not give you 2 florins. I will not give you 2 florins. I will give you 5 florins because they are such fine shoes." He counted out the money. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 florins were placed in the old shoemaker's hand. The rich man put his shoes on and walked about the town and showed everybody just how fine he looked in these wonderful shoes. But now the old shoemaker had enough for 2 pieces of leather and some food. He and his wife that night, they sat by the side of the table and they cut out the pieces of leather for 2 pairs of shoes. But he was old and cold, and he thought that he would just leave the pieces of leather on top of the table and he would stitch them tomorrow. But his wife was very curious. She decided that in the middle of the night she would creep down to try and find out just who had made the shoes. She couldn't believe it. As she peeped round by the side of the curtain, she could see first a small ragged hat, and then a small face no bigger than your thumb, and then a body that was covered in a raggedy shirt and old trousers, and poor shoes upon its feet. And then there was another hat and another face, and soon there were 2 elves who, with heads no bigger than your thumb and arms and legs no bigger than your fingers, could have fitted inside of her hand. And they climbed up the side of the table, and they started to stitch, and they started to hammer, and they started to sew all of the shoes, and the old woman gasped. She'd never seen 2 fine fellows so small. She told her husband the next day. He didn't really believe her, but he was curious. When they had made the shoes, they'd left them behind, and he put them in the window, and this time 2 rich people came, and when he asked for 2 florins, they said, "We will not give you 2 florins. We shall give you 5, 10 florins for each of the pairs of shoes." And now he had 20 florins. He had enough money to buy 4 pieces of leather and to make sure that their Christmas would be a good Christmas indeed. With all of the cutting, he was old and cold. He left all of the pieces of leather on top of the table. But this time he crept down the stairs with his wife, and the 2 of them peeped from behind the curtain, and sure enough they saw the raggedy hat. They saw the small heads no bigger than your thumb, the arms no longer than your fingers, the legs no longer than your small fingers, and they looked and saw that the hat upon their heads, and the shirts upon their backs, and the trousers on their legs, and the boots upon their feet were all worn, and they could do with some new clothes and shoes. So when they had made the shoes, and now lots of people came to the old cobbler's shop, they wanted him to make shoes for them. He decided, he and his wife, they would make some clothes for these 2 elves. They'd seen how big they were, how long their arms were, how long their legs were, and with small scraps of leather, on that Christmas Eve, they made a fine suit of clothes, 2 hats, 2 shirts, 2 trousers, and 2 pairs of finely stitched shoes. They also left for them 2 loaves of bread, no longer than your little finger. They left 2 cups of wine, no bigger than your thumb. And the 2 of them crept downstairs, and they watched, and they waited. And as it came to the stroke of midnight, they saw 2 hats, 2 bodies, 2 arms, 2 legs. And the 2 elves climbed up the table, but there was no leather there for them to cut, or stitch, or hammer, or sew. But there were hats and shirts, trousers and shoes. And the old man and his wife, they peeped from behind the curtain, and they laughed to themselves to see these 2 small men putting hats on their heads and shirts on their back, and new trousers that fitted them perfectly, and shoes upon their feet, and they ate at the bread and they drank at the wine, and they stopped. They looked at each other, these 2 elves, they looked at each other, and they realized that since these clothes fitted so well, that someone must have seen them. The 2 elves looked about. They could not see the old shoemaker and his wife hiding behind the curtain, but they knew that they'd been seen. The old man and the old woman, sometimes they would leave pieces of leather for them to stitch and sew, but the elves, once they've been seen, will never return. But it didn't matter. Everyone had heard about the fine shoes that the shoemaker made, not quite as good as the ones that the elves made. And people would pass by his shop and pay him florins till his pockets would burst. And every Christmas Eve they would lay out 2 loaves no bigger than your little finger, and 2 cups of wine no bigger than your thumbs. And every Christmas morning the cups would be empty, and all there would be on top of the table would be crumbs from 2 small loaves that had been eaten by their 2 small visitors. High above the tree line, and a place that was once known as Czechoslovakia, there is a village. A village where, when the snow falls, it truly falls and lies upon the ground, and the roads will be blocked. But the people inside of that village were always happy. The snow would fall, the roads would be blocked, and the school would be closed. And the children would be out playing snowball fights, playing with snowmen, sliding and slipping and sledging. There was an old couple who would love to see the children playing, for they had no children of their own. They would watch the children as they played. And one day, the old man, whose name was Peter, he looked towards his wife. He said, Greta, why don't we go out and we shall play like the children, and we shall make ourselves a snowman. No, we shall make a snow child. Everyone laughed to see the old couple making a snow child, but they made sure it had long straight hair, clothes upon its back, a smile upon its lips, and it was as Peter went over and started to smooth the snow to make the lips that he staggered back. Greta looked at him. Oh, what is it? And here he crossed himself, for he could feel a warm breath upon his fingers. And as they stood and watched, this child made out of snow shook itself and looked towards its new parents. Father, you have made me out of snow. I would wish to live inside of your house. The old couple were not going to argue with this child. They were very pleased indeed. And everyone smiled to themselves to see now that Peter and Greta were happy. This child, that they named Snowflake, grew taller and stronger and could dance better than any of the other children in all of the village. And the children would come knocking on the door. They would want to play with Snowflake. They would dance, they would play in the snow. And when the snow fell down, Snowflake was never happier. But when her new mother and father would ask her to sit by the side of the fire, Snowflake would speak. No, mother. No, father. I'm quite happy to sit here in the dark, cold corner of the house. Peter and Greta thought that it was better to have the child inside of the house than worry about whether she was hot or cold. But a winter does not last forever, and soon grass was poking up through the snow. The sun would poke its way in between the clouds, and the children, if they knocked on the door and were going to go out into the sunlight, Snowflake would stay inside of the house. It was only when they would knock at a night time and say that they were going into the forest that Snowflake would go with them. For the snow would still lie upon the ground, for the wind could not penetrate between all of the branches of the trees, and the sun could not get down between all of the leaves and the branches in the forest. And Snowflake would be happy there. But one day, Midsummer's Day, when Snowflake had stayed inside of the house and had not gone out for a long time, she came to the door, and the children all laughed and grabbed hold of Snowflake's hand and dragged her outside. They dragged her outside and they started to dance towards the forest. There was a smell of wood smoke in the air, for this is a story from a time before this time when people would light fires in their hearths and there would always be wood smoke in the air. Snowflake was quite happy. A boy was dancing in front of her and holding her left hand, and a girl was dancing behind her and holding onto her right hand, and they danced in a great long snake this way and that in between the trees to the heart of the forest where there was still some snow upon the ground. Snowflake was very pleased. She danced, being dragged by the boy and pulling the girl behind her, and they danced towards the middle of the forest. And I will tell you that at Midsummer's Day, they would take all of the old leaves and twigs and put them into a great bonfire and burn them. And now the children were dancing this way and that in amongst all of the trees. They danced and on they went, and pulling Snowflake further and further, and along they came to where there was the fire, and the boy jumped over the flames, and Snowflake jumped over, and there was a sigh, and they saw some mist rise up into the air, and the girl looked, for Snowflake had gone. She did not know where she had gone, and children had to go back to tell Peter and Kveta that Snowflake, when she jumped over the flames of the fire, had turned into water and mist and steam and raised up into the air. Now there is a stool in the corner of the house, the cold, dark corner of the house. And those two old people, Peter and his wife Kveta, they sit there and remember what it was like to have a child that would sit in the darkened corners. And every winter, when the snow would fall, they would make a snow child and wish. There cannot be many who have not heard of the name of Uther Pendragon, for he was the father of King Arthur. He kept peace in this great land of ours, but it always came at a cost, with battles and fights, and battling costs money. But he was lucky, because he had a friend called Sir Clages, a tall, strong and rich man, with many houses, many halls, great fields where corn would be grown, and he would always, without thinking, reach into his own pocket and give gold to Uther Pendragon. At Christmas time, many would come and visit Sir Clages. They would sit at his table and they would be given gold and silver. And when there was gold and silver upon the table, there were always friends wanting to go and see Sir Clages. But battles are costly. And soon Sir Clages had to sell a house here, a hall there, some fields and some lands elsewhere. And the gatherings at Christmas, there was not so much gold upon the table. There was not so much silver upon the table either. And Sir Clages found that these friends of his were only interested in the gifts that he would give to them. Soon, there were no gatherings at all, and soon the only house that he had was the one that he lived in with his wife and his son and his daughter. Without money, he could not wear fine clothes on his back. Without money, a beard grew upon his chin, and his hair grew long, and he did not resemble the tall, strong, brave Sir Clages of old. Sir Clages brought all of his family together and spoke to them as the snow fell outside so close to Christmas time. My family, I am sorry. All of the money that we once had is now gone, and all we have is this roof above our head. I will go outside and I shall pray for a miracle. And out Sir Clages went. Now, outside of his house there was a great sycamore tree. The leaves had gone. It was bare and barren, and he stood there and he put his hands together and he prayed long, loud and hard for a miracle. And he had his eyes closed, and when he opened them, he found nothing had changed. He was shocked. He would always kept this Christmastide, and now he staggered back, and as he staggered back, he rested his hand against the sycamore tree, and before his very eyes it sprang into bud and leaves and blossom, and was soon covered with cherries. Beautiful, round, ripe cherries. Cherries in winter time. And Sir Cleges knew that this was a great miracle. He took one himself and laid it upon his tongue. It was the sweetest thing that he had ever tasted in all of his life. He gathered them all up and placed them inside of a great basket, covered the basket over, showed them to his family, and decided that he would take them to the new king, King Arthur. For such a great king, who was a son of Uther Pendragon, deserved to take part in such a great miracle. And as he went on his way, he kept thinking to himself. He wondered what reward he would get for taking cherries, a Christmas miracle, to see the king. When he got close to the great castle, there he was with a beard on his chin and hair that straggled over his shoulders. And who was there but a soldier? He stood there. You, what do you want? The king don't want to see the likes of you. Go away. What have you got in the basket? And here Sir Cleges pulled back the cloth and showed it to the soldier. The soldier smiled. Oh, cherries in winter time. Cherries at Christmas. I think that King Arthur would be very pleased to see them. I tell you what, old man, I'll let you go inside of the castle if you give me a third of whatever reward King Arthur gives to you. But mind you, you've got to give it to me bigger and better. Sir Cleges thought that to have 2/3 of a reward was better than nothing at all, and so he agreed to the bargain, and he was let inside of the outer wall of the castle. But as he went a bit further towards the middle of the castle, he came to where there was the Master-at-Arms, proud and haughty. You, sir, what do you think you're doing here? You, like a beggar. King Arthur does not want to see the likes of you. What have you got inside of that basket? And here Sir Cleges, he pulled back the cloth and revealed the cherries at Christmas time, and the Master-of-Arms rubbed his hands together and said, well, I'm sure he will like to see those, but you've got to promise me that if you take them and show them to King Arthur, you must give me 1/3 of the reward that he gives to you. But listen, you must give it to me bigger and better and harder. Sir Cleges thought that to take 1/3 of a reward was better than nothing at all, and so he was allowed to go into the keep of the castle. But as he walked along the corridor, who should be there but the cook? What do you want? What are you doing here? Why are you here? What have you got? What's in the basket? Sir, King Arthur doesn't want to see the likes of you. Go away. What have you got in the basket, by the way? Sir Cleges pulled it back and showed the cherries at Christmas time. The cook looked. Well, I suppose you would want to see those, and tell you what. You will give me 1/3 of the reward that King Arthur gives to you, but bigger, better, harder, longer and stronger. Sir Cleges thought that it would be worth just to see King Arthur, the son of his great friend. There was such a commotion going on around Sir Cleges that King Arthur called him over. You, old man, why are you here? And here Sir Cleges pulled back the cloth, and King Arthur looked at the cherries. Cherries at Christmas time. That is indeed a great miracle. Would it be all right if I were to taste one? And here he pulled one, placed it upon his lips, teeth and tongue, and he made sure that everyone in the great gathering inside of the hall was given a taste of the cherries. And now he spoke to the old man. You, old man, what would you want as a reward? Sir Cleges smiled. I would wish to have 4 blows of your staff upon my head, 4 blows of your staff upon my back, and 4 blows of your staff upon my arms. But remember, I am an old man, your majesty." King Arthur thought this was the strangest thing ever. But he did take his staff and he laid it once and twice and 3 and 4 times upon the old man's head, making sure that he didn't hurt him. And once and twice and 3 and 4 times upon his back, and twice upon each arm. And Sir Claudius turned and walked away. He came to where there was the soldier. "You, you've got your reward. You're going to give it to me?" Sir Claudius smiled. "Are you sure that you want it bigger and better?" "Oh, yes, I really do." The soldier stood there. He laid down his lance, he laid down his sword, and stood there with his hands open and his eyes closed, and Sir Claudius took up his great staff and whacked him 4 times upon his head. The soldier screamed, yelled, bawled, howled and hollered, and ran away from that place. Sir Claudius now sought out the master of arms. "You old man, I hope that you're going to give me the reward that you got from King Arthur. Are you sure you want it bigger, better and stronger?" "Oh, yes." And yes, Sir Claudius picked up his staff. He might have been old, but he was very strong. And he whacked the master of arms 4 times upon his back, and the master of arms ran away from that place squealing like a pig. And now Sir Claudius sought out the cook. "I do hope you're going to give me the reward." "Are you sure you want it bigger, better, harder, longer and stronger?" "Oh, yes." And again the cook stuck out his arms, closed his eyes, and was whacked once and twice and 3 and 4 times. And now inside of the great keep, the cook's voice rattled and echoed, and King Arthur came down to see what had happened. He asked why Sir Claudius had asked for the 4 blows upon his head, 4 blows upon his back, 4 blows upon his arms. And Sir Claudius spoke. "When I helped your father, King Arthur." And it was then that King Arthur recognized who this old man was. "Sir Claudius, we have searched everywhere for you, but every time we went to one of your old homes, you were not there, for you'd sold it. We could not find you. We did not know where you were. And what can I do for you? You, the greatest friend to my father." Sir Claudius asked if he could be brought inside of the castle to spend the last of his days with his family inside of the castle. And that was just what would happen. He would be there inside of the great castle with his wife. And King Arthur, because he found out that those people who served him would steal from an old man a gift that had been given freely, he made sure that Sir Claudius' son became the master of arms, that Sir Claudius' daughter became the cook. And every Christmas they would sit and listen to the story of the Christmas cherries. Now you all know me, and you know that I could never look you in the eyes and lie to you. So this story is true. It's as true as these 5 fingers on my right hand. Now it was the night before Christmas. And seeing as how it was getting very close to Christmas, I knew that it was about time that I bought some presents. And when I say some presents, I really mean all of the presents. For times had been hard inside of the Wilson household, And where I live is at the top of the hill by the mouth of a river at the edge of the sea. And there are two ways that you can go into the town. You can either go through the town or you can go down by the side of the river. Now I knew that everyone would be trying to buy presents. Everyone would be there in the hustle and bustle of the town. So really the only way that I could go would be down by the side of the river. There wouldn't be so many people there. And as in many places, it is a place where there is building, for people love to live by the side of the sound of water. And as I was going down, I had to go through all of the building work that was there. And there was a great sign. Danger, keep out. Do not enter into this place. So I knew then that that was the way for me to go. I clambered over all of the rubble and the bricks and the wood to try and get down to the marketplace that is held in the heart of South Shields. Now I've lived in this place many years, but perhaps it was because as I scrambled and pulled my way through all of the debris at the building, that I found myself in a part of town that I'd never seen before. And there I could see that there was a stall, a market stall, and it was not lit by lights. It was not lit by a candle's flame. It was lit with some kind of bright light inside of jars that were hung from the side. And as I looked towards the stall, I could see that there was a sign above it. And by the light of this strange glow inside of these jars, I could see that there was a sign, and it said, "Mickey's Dreams, purveyor of sleep, dreams and lies, established the 30th of the 2nd, 89. I was surprised, but when I looked, I could see that there was a man behind the stall with white hair that hung over his shoulders, a long thin beard that hung on his chest, and he was taking newspaper and he was tearing it into the shape of Zs, folding them and putting them inside of envelopes, old envelopes, putting them inside, and before he sealed them, he was winking and counting 37, 38, 39, 40, 40 winks. Sleep well and dream well. I couldn't help myself. I was curious, to say the very least. So I said to him, "What are you doing?" And it was then that he looked up from his work and he looked at me and he scornfully said, "Well, what do you think I'm doing?" "I'm making up a parcel of sleep for a snorer in Vancouver." As if it were the most natural thing to say in all of this world. Well, I didn't need to stand there and be insulted by him. There are many other places I can go to be insulted. So I turned on my heel, and he must have realised that he had spoken too harshly to me. For he spoke and said, young man, and I liked that. He said, "Young man, come back, come back. I did not mean to speak so harshly to you. Come back. Have one of these." And here, he reached for a brown paper bag. It had some scrawled writing on it. And he thrust it towards me, and inside there were small cakes. Sweet to the smell, and as I imagined, even sweeter to the taste. And he pushed the bag towards me. I reached inside and took one. And it was as I bit into it that I started to reel. My head started to move, and all of the ground seemed to sway beneath me. And it was then that I looked and saw what was written on the side of the bag. It said, 6 deep-filled Christmas minced lies. He smiled to himself, and this time, instead of tearing at newspaper, he sat himself down and took pieces of card, golden card, and he was folding them and cutting at them and making the shape of a box. But before he sealed the box, again he would wink and he would whisper, 37, 38, 39, 40, 40 winks. Sleep well, dream well. And he placed the box onto his stall. And it was then that I noticed that the whole of the stall was covered with boxes, long, thin, wide, broad, tall, boxes of every colour and hue and made of all different kinds of materials. There was a wooden box. There was a box that was made out of rubber. There was a box that seemed to float, and it was then that I looked, and I could see that there was a box that was made out of gold. It was as if it was made out of golden filigree. I reached towards it, and as I reached towards it, I could see that this man behind the stall smiled to himself, and before I had a chance to ask him a question, he spoke and said, "That's a box that's filled with good dreams." I reached towards it. It seemed to weigh virtually nothing at all, and I looked inside. There was nothing inside of it, and I placed it back. There was another box that seemed to be made out of those pieces of wood that would contain oranges, orange box wood, and it was twisted in one corner, had a small piece of wallpaper against it. I reached towards it, and again, before I had a chance to ask, he said, "That's a box that's filled with broken dreams." I picked it up. It was twisted, as if it had been taken and thrown and smashed against a wall. There was one box. It was black. It was soft to the touch. And I picked it up, and I listened, and I could hear the sound of the sea inside of it. And he said, "That is a box that is filled with dreams that a young boy had when he was looking at his teacher's legs and not singing Christmas carols." And I blushed and put the box down very quickly. There was one box that seemed to be held on a golden hook on a silver line, and it floated this way and that in the breeze upon his stall. And again he spoke before I had a chance to ask, and he said, "That is a box that is filled with dreams about floating and flying." I don't know about you, but I have many dreams about flying and floating and falling. And it was then that it occurred to me that I could, because I needed presents, I could perhaps buy one of these boxes and take them as presents. But before I had spoken, he looked at me and said, "No, these boxes are not for sale, not to the likes of you. You need to be strong, you need to be clever, you need to be good with your mind and your thoughts and your body, and these are not for sale to the likes of you." And he went back to his tearing of pieces of newspaper and placing them back into envelopes. Who was he to tell me that I wasn't strong enough or clever enough to take one of his boxes? I would have paid, but I thought that I would teach him a lesson. And as he sat there, folding and whispering, and I thought that while he was not looking, I would just take one box. For there was one at the corner of his stall, made out of old cardboard. He wouldn't miss it. And as I walked, I wasn't sure, but it looked as if he had a smile upon his lips. And I reached down towards it, took it and thrust it inside of my coat, and I ran. Now I will tell you this, and this is the truth. I have never stolen anything in all of my life. And I hadn't gone more than 10 paces around the corner to where there was the hurly-burly hustle and bustle of the great marketplace. And it was there that my cheeks reddened. And I knew that I would have to give it back. And I turned around, and as I turned around and ran back, there was no stall. There was no light inside of jars. There was no stall, no Mickey's Dreams, no boxes, nothing whatsoever. Now, I might not be the wisest or the strongest or the bravest, but it wasn't until last night that I took that box and placed it in the corner of my room and opened it. And there was a dream inside. And the dream was this: that you would be watching a curly-haired man who comes from the north of the country, who is as handsome as the day is long, and you would be watching and listening to a story. So you see, this story is true. It's as true as these two brown eyes in my head. Now, you all know me, and you know that I could never look you in the eyes and lie to you. So this story is true. It's as true as these 5 fingers on my right hand. Now, it was the night before Christmas, and seeing as how it was getting very close to Christmas, I knew that it was about time that I bought some presents. And when I say some presents, I mean all of the presents, for times had been very hard inside of the Wilson household. Now, where I live is at the top of the river by the mouth of the sea, and in that place there are 2 ways to go into the town. You can either go down by the edge of the river, or you can go down